killing brush. I've got him at gunpoint.
They're pulling them out.
10-1-1. Advise ready for camp.
God!
Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom.
And I'm Chuck.
And okay, so Chuck, before we get to our guest, who is sitting here waiting patiently, I wanted to mention something funny that happened to me, and it kind of dovetails into what our guest has got going on. But I started my new gig, and I'll be working within a school system. I won't say any more than that. But one of the new guys that I'm going to be working with, he is a Marine, and his son is in the Army. And his son, I gave him a ball cap just because, I work with this guy, and his son comes home from Fort Bragg to visit his dad and sees the ball cap and was like, "What's up with that?" And he's like, "Oh, that's, this guy I work with. That's the podcast he has." And he's like, "Oh shit. I've listened to that." So, I wanted to give a shout out to Private First Class AJ Triana of Fort Bragg.
What's up, Boot? Or whatever they call you over there, cherries or whatever.
Yeah, what do they call it?
Cherries.
I mean, is it cherries?
They're a cherry, I guess, or some shit like that. I don't know. That's what John would say. He told me, because it's different lingo from the Marine Corps to the Army.
Yeah, it's always like everybody's different because
you're just a piece of shit when you're young. In the Marine Corps, you get abused, and it's all about. I'm all about it. It's great.
It's right.
I don't know about the new generation,
but speaking of schools, our guest this week is who? Chuck, tell us who you got us this week. Besides the guy with the smoke alarm beep. By the way, if you guys hear that, unfortunately, as we started recording, our guest's smoke alarm started to die, so we may just have to soldier on.
So we have Ryan. He's a United States Marine Corps veteran, and he was overseas for a little bit, and now he is a elementary school teacher.
Yeah, right. Is that correct, Ryan? You went from the Marine Corps to being an elementary school teacher.
Yeah, that is correct. It was kind of a weird road.
Well, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us about that? Yeah, right. I probably had teachers that were that are Marines, but I wouldn't know. I don't know that they ever. I don't. Do your students know?
Yeah, they know because my principal's kind of open with our background. So she kind of lets all of them know in the beginning of the year, which I was kind of against at the beginning because I feel like once kids know one thing about you, they fixate on it. So, yeah. And I kind of just embraced it after that. I don't come out with war stories in the classroom or tell them about all the moto stuff.
Not in elementary school.
No, yeah.
No. And it's pretty rare, I think, to have male elementary school teachers anyways, but especially like a veteran. So kind of a weird road of how I got here, but I really do enjoy it. I'm going on 4 years of doing it now.
Well, speaking of which, let's talk about that road a little bit. Why don't you walk us through how you first became a Marine? And we'll talk about your experiences as a Marine real quick, and then what led you to your current vocation.
Yeah, so I kind of knew early on. I was one of those guys that got the bug. I was in fifth grade when 9/11 happened. And my grandma, I'm from Kenosha, Wisconsin. If anyone wonders how they know that name, that's where the Kyle Rittenhouse thing went down.
Yeah, right.
So I'm from Kenosha, Wisconsin. My grandma pulled me out of school when 9/11 happened, like they were going to target my elementary school. And so I was at home and watched it on TV. And I kind of got the bug after that when I saw, the first, I think it was Navy SEALs and Green Berets going to Afghanistan, watched the invasion of Iraq on TV. And I kind of just knew, like when I got into high school, I graduated early when I was 17 and went to boot camp 2 days later. So I kind of knew what road I was on.
Now you were on the delayed entry program for that, or
was
it just the scheduling worked out?
I enlisted when I turned 17, was in the delayed entry program for 6 months. Not the drill instructor, the recruiter was, I think they needed to meet quota. It was during, 2009 going to 2010, the surge was going on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
They were still doing that.
Yeah. So they told me, I went in, I was, a motivated kid, and I was like, I want infantry. That's it. And so he's like, hey, if you can actually graduate from high school early, if your parents sign the paperwork, which my dad was really quick to do. My mom was a lot more hesitant. So
Your dad was like GTFO.
yeah, exactly. So my dad told me, he's like, good on you, go. My mom, it was a hard time for, I think, our relationship because I was not the nicest about it. I knew I wanted to do it. So yeah, I graduated early. She eventually signed the paperwork, and it just worked out where I worked with the counselors, and they were good about making sure I could graduate on time. And I graduated, I think the first semester ends right around Christmas. So I had Christmas with my family, graduated like January 1st. I set out for boot camp like 2 days later.
Nice.
So how does that work? You just basically, as a senior, you had very few electives or very few mandatory classes left, and the rest were all electives. And so you were able to kind of cram all the requirements for your senior year into one semester and GTFO, or?
Yeah, so they took all of my electives off my schedule, and they just gave me all the mandatory classes you needed to graduate. And so I was able to graduate, early. And that's what I wanted to do. I was honestly a terrible high school student, which is ironic because now I'm a teacher, but I was awful, But as soon as I, decided to join the Marine Corps when I was younger and enlisted when I was 17, I just, got a fire underneath my ass to get it done and put my GPA where I needed it to be. So
that's good. Right. Good on you. I had a buddy who did that. His name was Wesley. He went to the Marine Corps early. And he was like almost a full year ahead of me in the Marine Corps. And I was like, damn, but my parents didn't sign the waiver, and I was probably too shitty of a student to do that. And playing football and everything, I was like, nah, I'm going to stay. And then I had a dude I served with named Tabor Young, and he was a waiver. He was 17 when he came in, and we had to buy that dude cigarettes for the first couple months of the fleet. It was really weird.
I wonder if you can get arrested for that.
Dude, you're young enough to die you're old enough to die for your country. Why can't you drink? Why can't you smoke? I
agree.
Do what you want. It used to be so on base where you could do whatever you want. But in 2007, they're like, no, you can't drink on base. You can't do any of that shit. I mean, you would still do it, but you weren't able to go into like a enlisted club or anything like that, or, do your NCO club and drink.
Yeah.
You couldn't drink. They just would know. But there was so much booze flowing around that shit. Oh my God. You didn't even need to.
Well, I mean, like you said, and that's one of my things. If you are old enough to vote, but you're not old enough to buy a gun or drink, then how is that? You can pick the people that are running the country and you can fight and die for it, but you can't buy a gun, buy a handgun, or consume alcohol. That's just dumb.
And what's the big push right now? Like 18-year-olds shouldn't be able to buy ARs. You can go serve your country and carry M4 and M16, but you can't.
Right.
Buy an AR at the same age. Yeah.
Right.
So ridiculous.
Well, right now we have a country that is basically being run by a man who's telling us that, good luck with our Second Amendment because we have to fight F-15s. I'm like, wait, you're really just saying that to your own people? Just saying that?
Same guy that pulled out of Afghanistan and, left F-15s to the Taliban, and also, I guess, forgot about the 20-year guerrilla war they ran. So,
yeah. Yeah, well, we don't have to get into that. Yeah, exactly.
But,
it is an embarrassment. Even whether you agree with politics or not, as far as military operations and military actions and use of the military and support of the military, it's been a friggin' joke as far as I'm concerned. But we could spend the whole hour just on that. So you went in at 17 and a half, and where'd you go to basic?
I went to Camp Pendleton. So Wisconsin is to the west of the Mississippi, so you go to Camp Pendleton. So I was a Hollywood Marine.
Okay,
yeah, so
there you go. And now, how was that your first trip to California?
Yeah, it was my first plane ride. I'd never flown on a plane before. I got really sick, and I showed up, and we went to the USO, and there's drill instructors there shouting. There was no delay. It was like we got off the plane. I'm still puking in a bag, and there's the entry level drill instructors there that are a little bit nicer, but they're still screaming at you and everything else. So I was pretty culture shocked.
And that was your first time ever in California, obviously. After that, did you think that California, just all of California, looked like ass the way Camp Pendleton did?
No, I traveled a lot while I was there, especially like I went to MCRD San Diego, but I went to infantry school at Camp Pendleton also. So I went to like La Jolla down to San Diego.
Okay. So you get to see some nice stuff.
Yeah.
What were you saying, Chuck?
When you got off the plane, you met like those those nicer drill instructors, and then you went to receiving and all that stuff. And you did your little phone call, but you're like, okay, I expected this. I saw it on all the brochures, so the little videos. I'm cutting our hair, like basically scalping you, and you're like, that hurts, but they really weren't. Like, it wasn't the yelling that I had seen, making a Marine or any of the other shit.
Like Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, but you do. There was a show, Making Marines, and they never showed receiving. They only showed like the kill hats and your senior drill instructor yelling at you.
Yeah.
And it was rough. And I'm there and I'm thinking, I'm like, dude, this is fucking cake. This is like the Boy Scouts. This is easy. My dad yells at me harder than this. And then all of a sudden you meet your fucking senior and the kill hats come in and shit hits the fan when that nicer drill instructor hands you over to your daddy, and daddy comes in and lays down the hammer real quick. And you're like, what the fuck is this? Did you have that same feeling? Like when you came in, you're like, what is this? This is the Marine Corps. Like, this is cake. This is easy.
Oh yeah.
These guys are,
I thought it
cupcakes.
I thought it was like, I got lied to because the recruiters are like, oh yeah, you're going to fucking hate your life, especially being 17. And I was like, okay, like I'm still going to go, but that sucks. And they had all the letters on the side of the wall in the recruiting station, all the guys that wrote back, like, why did you lie to me? All that shit. Like, and so I got there and it was like, I always think about it as, you have a nice mom and then she uses the thing, like, wait till dad gets home. And so when we got our actual drill instructors, it was like dad got home and what do they call it? Black Friday, where you get your drill instructors, you get there like Thursday and Friday is just a haze fest for like 10 hours straight.
That's awesome.
I heard now, like, they don't do a lot of the stuff they used to do, but they used to do the Scuzz Brush 500 with us, which Scuzz Brush is, did you do that? Yeah, that's fun. Yeah. It's a brush and they put a foot locker in the middle of the room and they make you go around the foot locker and you have the Scuzz Brush and you're just scrubbing the floor and they're making you make NASCAR sounds. And so we just did that for like 2 hours. And that's where I figured out that I probably made a poor decision with my life. But,
it was at that moment Ryan knew he had fucked up.
Yeah.
We had races, dude, from one side to the other. And then when dudes would piss their bed or whatever. What? Back up.
Oh yeah,
guys would pee their bed, talk really in their sleep, crazy shit, dude.
Really,
fucking sleepwalking stuff.
I've heard of sleepwalking. I've heard of talking in their sleep. I didn't hear that people piss. Now, is there like a special hazing that you?
Well, they would make
you piss
kill. Well, you get fucked up, but they make us kill a canteen of water every fucking night. You do your inspection. They would spray you in the fucking mouth with aqua velvet. And because they would always fuck up the Listerine and the aqua velvet and fucking spray Listerine in your eyes and aqua velvet in your mouth. And then they would make you kill a whole fucking canteen and they'd make you chug it by the numbers. And then you would have to hold it upside down. And if any water leaked out, they would haze you. And then they would put you in bed. And then the drill instructors would be walking around in the middle of the night, fucking with you, like seeing who's out of their beds, who's talking, and then fuck you up real quick, take you to the head, destroy you in the head, and put you back. But they would make you kill a whole bottle of water in the middle of the night. And you really couldn't get up.
You're so exhausted. Yeah.
And guys were pissing themselves.
Yeah, they would hunt you down if you tried to go to the head in the middle of the night. Like, it was, you either pissed your pants or you went to the head and you got hazed in the head while you're pissing your pants. So like you just pissed. Yeah.
About getting hazed in the head, we were close. We were like third phase, and we had just been investigated by NCIS for hazing, and it was fucking wild. And that's a whole nother story. But this one dude we picked up from he got recycled from a different platoon. I never forget it. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard screaming. I was like, what the fuck? I'm like, I gotta piss. So I walk over and I tell the fire, it's like, hey, I gotta go to the fucking bathroom, dude, like really bad. He's like, no, don't. And I'm like, I'm gonna piss myself. He's like, in your fucking canteen, do not go in there. And I'm like, why? He's like, dude, just peek in. And so they're like these weird big doors, but they have like a small sliver of glass that you can like peer through. And I fucking look through it, and all I see is about 1.5 feet of water on the ground. A fucking this recruit with a towel pushing it back and forth while like 3 drill instructors are in there. All the kill outs from all the different platoons fucking with this guy, trying to get him to quit. And he was there all night. He actually ended up breaking his arm, finished, and then went to BAS afterwards. And it was wild. I was like, dude, I'm not going in there. Fuck that, dude. It was And in the morning, it was all clean. It was drained, everything. You're like, what the fuck happened? The dude was shell shocked, bro. Like, it was wild. But
so what did you end up after you got out of basic and you moved on to your military career. What did you end up doing in the military in the Marine Corps?
I was a 0311 first. And so I went to infantry school at Camp Pendleton. I think it's 3 months long, if I remember right. And you learn just how to basically be a basic 0300, which is just infantry. And then you go to a selection, which it's mortarman, machine gunner, anti-tank, and then can't remember the other one. Yeah, machine gunner, rifleman, mortarman, and anti-tank. And you go to kind of like a selection, like you're picking a college class. And so I was in line with a buddy, I'll say his name, Britton. If he ever hears this, shout out to him. And we were in line and we flipped a coin. We were in line to be mortarman. And, heads were going to go be riflemen, tails were going to stay mortarman. Flipped the coin, turned out to be heads. So we went to be riflemen. And so you change off after a month and a half. Everyone does the same month and a half, 0300 kind of basic package. So everyone's got the same infantry kind of skills. And then I went to my specific job, which is being an 0311 rifleman. So kind of like the basic grunt that everyone imagines when they think about the Marine Corps grunt.
Sure.
And then after that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what I was going to ask. What was your next step?
So there was a guy that showed up. It was a sergeant, and he was recruiting people for advanced infantry training. And so it was for light armored vehicles, which I had no idea what they were, but I just knew I did a 20-kilometer movement and my shins were killing me. I had really bad shin splints. I actually had a stress fracture in my right shin when I was in infantry school. And so I just got the crap beat out of me the whole time. I didn't know what was going on. If you went to BAS, there was a chance that you would get stuck there for like a year sometimes to get re-rolled into a class, especially in 2010. So a guy showed up with a cool looking vehicle. It's like basically a armored vehicle with a big cannon on top. And his line verbatim was, if you really don't like hiking all of your gear, go to advanced infantry school and become an LAV crewman. And so I just decided there, I was like, that's what I want to do because these shin splints are killing me. Yeah, that is correct. That's exactly what I want to do. It didn't work out that way for me, but I went to LAV school. I graduated and I went to first LAR. So I went to Camp Pendleton, 1st Marine Division, which is actually a really cool thing. Light Armored Reconnaissance is what it stands for. And it's a regimental asset. So there's only 4 of them in the Marine Corps. 1st LAR, 2nd LAR, which is on the East Coast. And then you have 3rd LAR, which is in warrior country at 29 Palms in the middle of the desert. So those guys, shout out to them because they're just getting the shit end of the stick for where they are. And then you have 4th LAR, which is all the reserves. So pretty cool unit. I wasn't a pig. Yeah.
Yep.
So
we'd pull you guys out in Lejeune all the time out of New River because you guys couldn't cross the little streams.
So they're supposed to be amphibious. And if you've ever read the manual of making them amphibious, they sink a lot. And so, they have a tendency to get stuck. And that'll go into my story today that we talk on later on, because, Afghanistan Iraq, they slayed so many people in those things. And we did in Afghanistan too, but they really are vulnerable to you getting stuck. And as we're seeing in Russia right now, armored vehicles against anti-tank and IEDs is really not where you want to be. So
yeah.
I was an Amtracker, so I know the pigs very, very intimately, very well. And then, so after that, you went to become a teacher after you got out, and you went to elementary school of all things to be a teacher. So how is it like, arguing with the kids over, crayons and things like that?
Well, I definitely, I eat all the crayons first, and then I save the glue for after school. So that's what I do. So I do like a collection at the beginning of the year, and I keep all the red ones.
The crayons are like your appetizer, and then the glue is like the main course.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Is that your after dinner cocktail?
Yeah, that's like a stress reliever for me. I huff it first and then I chug it. So
nice.
Yeah.
Cool. And
I'm sorry.
No, go for it, bro.
I was going to say, I work in an Air Force town. There's an Air Force base near me. So and it's a special forces base. So I teach a lot of like drone pilots, fighter pilots, kind of their fancy helicopter pilots kids. And so when they find out that I used to be a Marine, because like I said, my principal tells everybody and I don't hide it anymore. I usually get gifts in the beginning of the year where everyone gets those like kind of girly cups, I get crayons and glue from the parents. So it's kind of hilarious.
Fucking hilarious, dude.
So yeah.
So
you mean from the dads? Right.
100%.
The mom's like, is that really necessary? Is that they're like school supplies, honey?
Yeah, he needs it.
Before we get into your story, can you speak on real quick regarding like the training that you've said, because you told me before, kind of some of the training in the wake of all the school and shootings and things like that and stuff like that. You said you've been pretty proactive with your school, with kind of, you know, getting them more up to speed on what you should do instead of just shelter in place and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I wanted to do when I went into teaching inside an actual school, so I student taught somewhere, and the way that my mind works, I was looking at a lot of the vulnerabilities. You know, one point of entry would have been great. We had a bunch of them. No one knew how to use medical equipment. No one carried any. No one knew what to do in case of a lockdown if someone actually made entry to the room. So when I got to my school, which I've worked at for 4 years, I was a first year teacher. So it's kind of like being a boot. No one really cares what you think.
Right.
But I spoke up during a meeting and I voiced my opinion that, you know, our plan of putting all the kids in one corner and not having anything besides that was very flawed. You know, a good example of that is Sandy Hook. All the kids died in one room and they're all in the same bathroom. And it's very unfortunate anytime that happens. But I wanted to make sure my staff, my own son goes to the school that I teach at. And so I wanted to make sure that my staff would know what to do in that situation. So I really pushed for medical supplies. I always carry a trauma kit in my backpack that I carry into school.
Right.
And so past that, talking to my principal, and, you know, kudos to her, she was very vocal with the leadership of our district. And so now we have emergency buckets, they call them. And inside the bucket's there for a reason. Like you get stuck somewhere for 8 hours, kids have to use the bathroom. Sure. But inside the bucket, we have water, food, chem lights, a bunch of other like survival type stuff. But the big thing for me was we have pressure dressings right now, Israeli bandages mostly that's a good start. We're pushing right now for chest seals and tourniquets. And the nurse and I, we also have a procedure of if we have to use those things, I made sure all the staff set them up in the same place. So even if they don't know how to use them, if I say I'm at a casualty collection point and, you know, law enforcement's doing their thing because they're not there to right away help victims. They're there to neutralize the threat, which I've let them know, the teachers know. You know, I can help start trying to treat or anything else. But then the other big thing was mindset. That's been the biggest thing that I've tried to harp on is if you're in a classroom and there's someone outside your door, they make entry to your room, you have to fight. Those kids are your responsibility. When we take them underneath our care from their parents, we're giving them our obligate or our promise that we're going to do everything in our power to keep those kids safe. Yeah. And so, you know, barricade the door. Yeah. So, you know, barricade the door, improvised weapons. I've spoken about that. You know, that's kind of uncomfortable for people. And I have to remind myself all the time, even though I've been in bad situations in my life that have turned violent, you know, most of these people have not. They went, you know, they did what most teachers did. They went to high school, they went to college, they became a teacher, or they became a teacher later in life. And to them, you know, I still remember one of the staff meetings where I said, hey, you know, improvised weapons, we all have scissors in our room. And some of the eyes that I got when I said that, you know, what else are you going to do? We're not allowed to carry firearms. Right. You have to do what you have to do to defend those kids, break a window, get them outside the window, and you're at the door ready to do whatever you have to do. So just kind of those mindset talks of barricading, being willing to fight, not just accepting the fact that you're going to be a victim.
Right. It's getting rid of that victim mindset.
Yeah. You know, you rather, what's the motto saying, you know, I'd rather die on my feet than on my knees, but it really is one of those things where, like I said, my kid's in the same school. And that's one of the things I deal with is, you know, he's 6 years old. He's in first grade. If he's on the other side of the school and I know there's a shooting on that side of the school, it's going to be very hard for me not to grab a pair of scissors and run over there and do the best I can because that's my boy. Yeah. So I try to remember that and put that mindset in everyone else. Like we're responsible for these kids. So
one of the things I've seen in the schools in our area is above every AED hung on the wall is a stop the bleed kit.
That's what I'm pushing for, man, is get a Stop the Bleed kit. I've talked to the nurse. I have a male nurse. He's great. And that's kind of rare in elementary too. I'm the only male teacher at my school. And he's, I think, one of the only male nurses, and we work in the same school. And me and him talk all the time about if something like that would happen. You know, I'm not a paramedic or anything, but I've been through Combat Lifesaver multiple times. I try in my civilian life now, you know, I'm a cake eater now. I'm just cake eating civilian. I try to keep up with, you know, paramedic type classes if I can make it to one, and make sure I'm up to speed, because that's the best I can do in that circumstance until laws change and I can carry a firearm. So,
yeah. Right. And, you know, I know there's a lot of, for people that are listening to this, it's not as cut and dried as just giving the teachers guns, because first of all, you have to understand, and I'm sure, Ryan, you can attest to this, having met a lot of teachers, these are people that, like you said, a lot of times they go from kindergarten through high school, right? In school. Mm-hmm. Then they go to college, also school. Then when they graduate, they get their teaching certificate and they go back to teaching in school. Yep. So they have been in academia their entire life. And a lot of teachers have never had to hack it in the real world. They have this kind of, it's the same way that somebody who has been in the military their entire career and they got right out of high school, went to the military, and then, you know, they get out 30 years later and they all of a sudden go back to civilian life. Or this, anytime you're that entrenched in one lifestyle and one bubble, that's going to give you a worldview different than other people who have maybe been out in the world seeing and doing different things. That's one aspect. So not all teachers have the same mindset as Ryan here, who's, you know, been around the world with the Marine Corps and now has come to teaching as someone with some worldly life experience. And then secondly, you know, one of the things you got to think about in active shooter training, one of the things we discussed is if a teacher just happened to be armed, or there was an off-duty cop there or whatever, and the entry team goes in to take care of an active shooter and they see somebody armed, mm-hmm. they're going to smoke them. They don't have time to figure out if that's a teacher or not. So how do you solve that problem? These are all things that have to be addressed. So I hear a lot of people all the time just saying, just arm the teachers. Well, it's the same reason you don't just arm the flight attendants.
That comes down to
a lot of things to consider.
That comes down with the community and the community policing and getting the police on board and the deputies on board and the chief of police to come to the school and talk, and to have the officers go to the school and them know what, you know, if something like that was going to happen, know the teachers, but also maybe, you know, put some signifying mark on them that shows, hey, I'm a teacher, and if shit goes down and we're fucking armed, don't shoot me. Right. Type of thing. But that all comes down to community policing and the community getting together and speaking and talking and developing a plan and devising a plan, which I think is more important now than ever. As we could see in Uvalde and all the other school shootings.
So, that's why I say it's such a difficult, there's so many facets to it. Right.
Yeah. And it comes down to communities and communicating with the police departments between the schools. And we have a great police department where I'm at. The response times are really fast. They always have a presence outside the schools. I kind of teach in a smaller town in New Mexico, and they always have a presence outside all of the schools. That's and good. So they're very on top of it. And you know, I know if eventually the law changed, we would have a coordinating plan to make sure that didn't happen, or at least to try to mitigate it. It's the same thing as concealed carry. You know, that's something you have to worry about as a concealed carrier. If you have to engage someone, an active shooter, you know, what are you going to do afterwards? And, you know, hopefully you can't mitigate it completely, but there's steps you could take to increase your safety after a shooting to not get shot yourself.
Right. I was in plain clothes for my OIS, and my partner and I almost got smoked by the responding SWAT team because we were two dirtbags with guns. And luckily the two guys that were on the trigger in the SWAT van, or in the back of the SWAT truck over the top of the cab, they took that extra half a second worth of breath and saw that we weren't behaving like suspects and gave us time to pull out our badges, because otherwise we'd be dead, absolutely dead. Yeah. So it's an issue with a lot of moving parts. And unfortunately, there are so many people that are intractable on this subject. They don't even want to sit down and go to the table and have the discussion about hard things that it's going to take to solve it. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a problem with a lot of subjects lately in our country is no one wants to sit down and talk.
Yeah. They used to say you should never talk about religion and politics. And I think you did a disservice when you adopt that mentality, because what you should do is say, hey, we should talk about religion and politics, but we should learn to talk about it like adults. So we have an entire generation of people that don't know how to discuss either one of those subjects intelligently and like a grown up. So, but again, we could go on forever about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you what, though, I've seen, and I spoke to a guy who teaches for NASRO, which is the National Association of School Resource Officers. And what he said and what made me feel better is there is a nationwide push with a lot of departments to get away from the previous idea of a school resource officer, which was some guy 2 or 3 years away from retirement who wanted a cake schedule, for the last 3 years of his career, or a problem child who was out on the street, getting complaints or having training issues. And you're like, well, just make him the school resource officer, and then we won't have to worry as much about it. I'm gonna tell you what, in today's day and age, I would rather see some of the best and brightest and most dialed in coppers become school resource officers. One of my best friends who's been on this show, he was a partner of mine, SWAT cop, absolutely dialed in, was in 2 OISs, took rounds for his department, all that stuff. And he became a school resource officer. And we've teased about school resource officers on this show for a long time, Chuck, have we not? But ultimately, in all reality, SROs should be some of the most dialed in people, because they are responsible for protecting one of our most precious resources, which is the kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, Ryan, I really am stoked to hear that you're doing all that kind of stuff. I think that stuff is really important, but ultimately the floor is yours, man. What is your story?
So I thought about this a little bit because I did 2 deployments. I did a deployment in 2010 during the summer, kind of the fighting time in Afghanistan. If for any of the listeners that are over there, they know what I'm talking about. I left there right before 2011 for my first deployment, and I went back in later of 2011. So it was pretty fast turnaround. It was 7 months over there, came back for, I think it was 9 months, and went back for 7. But I kind of wanted to tell a story about my deployment in 2011 that went into 2012. I was with First LAR, and we were going back during the winter. So that's kind of the slow time in Afghanistan, if there's such a thing. So my platoon was tasked with route interdiction, which is as fun as it sounds. You go and drive out in the desert, you live out of your vehicles for like 3 to 4 weeks at a time before you go refit. And our job was to try to disrupt the Taliban running in weapons, IEDs, drugs, from Afghanistan to Pakistan and from Pakistan to Afghanistan. And so
that's the longest, shittiest camping trip I've ever heard of.
Oh, it was pretty awful. If you've ever eaten MRE, eating 4 weeks of them, you kind of learn how awful they are for your body. And so we were dealing with that. No showers. We had 1 sat phone for the whole platoon. So you'd usually go 4 or 5 weeks from talking to your family, and there wasn't really anything exciting about it. I think a lot of what I grew up with thinking about war and what I was motivated for was the images of Fallujah, Ramadi.
Sure.
And Sangin. Then Sangin. And I was there when Sangin was happening. I was actually, it was towards the end of our deployment in 2010, where I was in the TOC, which if I remember right, Tactical Operations Center. I was in there monitoring the computer for part of what my job was. And because I could read and write quick, which is, I guess, a super important skill and rare in the Marine Corps infantry. So I was in the TOC as a Lance Corporal, and I was watching what was happening to 3-5 and Sangin. And it was just, for any Marine out there or anyone who's in the Army or law enforcement, when you see one of your brothers, whether you know them or not, or your sisters get killed, it's awful. And so just watching what was happening to 3-5 with the IEDs was just terrible. And that deployment started out really slow, and we got kind of known for the battalion and for kind of we were down in Helmand Province, for everyone that was all the Marine Corps units that were down there. If someone needed like a a blocking mission or someone to intercept fighters going in and out, or where they thought drugs or guns were going, our platoon was kind of the go-to. And so I got to see a lot of Afghanistan, which was kind of cool, especially for the South, which is just desert. So it's not like you're seeing much different stuff, but it was just really slow. And coming from my 2010 deployment, I was already a combat veteran, but I had a bunch of boots that just wanted to get some. So trying to keep those guys in line as a corporal and trying to keep their heads on a swivel and not get complacent was tough. And that's kind of the reason I'm telling this story, because all of a sudden when the spring happened, it kind of ramped up. We didn't have any issues with IEDs personally at the beginning. And then there was a platoon, I can't remember what platoon or company it was anymore, but they had 3 IED strikes in one day. And so I had alluded to it earlier. LAVs are great if you want to kill people really fast. They have a 25 millimeter chain cannon that can shoot out to, I think, HE rounds. It's 3,000 meters. They self-detonate. So each one's like a little hand grenade. So you can shoot those pretty much point, and it's pretty close to 1 or 2 MOA. So like if you'd shoot it into a group with 5 rounds, you get close to 1 inch or 2 inches. So it's a very accurate weapon system. And it's very, very good at, like I said, killing dismounted infantry or enemy vehicles. What it's not really good at is withstanding IEDs or RPGs. They up-armored them. So same way that the Russians are dealing with it right now, BMPs and BTRs are really good at killing dismounted infantry, but they're also very vulnerable. And so we were sitting, I still remember, we were sitting at a FOB, we were refitting, and we got news that this platoon had hit 3 IEDs with LAVs in one day. And fortunately, no one was killed, but every time an LAV hit an IED while we were over there, usually the driver was killed because the engine's right next to the driver. And the Taliban, credit to them, they were very good at understanding where to put pressure plates and where they needed to detonate IEDs to get the most casualties. And so they were detonating those IEDs right underneath where the engine block would be. And so those drivers were dying. I think we lost 4 or 5 drivers while I was on my first deployment. And the unit before us, 4th LAR, had lost quite a few people, even their sergeant major. I think he was an LAPD captain, actually. And he was killed. And so they figured out the LAVs really quick. And so one of the things that happened was we knew there was an IED threat, and we had talked, and my Lieutenant Kavanaugh, I think he's a major now, he was really, really good about communicating with his NCOs. But one of the issues that the NCOs had, including myself, is we had also become kind of complacent. We hadn't really dealt with anything. We had some tense situations. We had a couple times where you'd roll up on vehicles that were going to actually Iran for workers from Afghanistan to go work in Iran, and you would go and search, and it'd be like 500 guys, and there's 30 of us. And so you would have to figure out how to mitigate those situations where people are getting pissed off, and you have, 500 people against 30 Marines, and any of them could have a suicide vest. So we're searching 500 people at a time, putting them into a system that tracks their fingerprints and their eyes. And so it was, we had some tense situations, but we hadn't seen combat that deployment yet, and we were rolling into the situation, and we were discussing with the lieutenant, and we were going to go down, and we were going to try to find the IED makers and disrupt what they were doing. So we had a kind of a aggressive mission set where we were going to set up a FOB on top of a hill that overlooked a valley that most Americans hadn't been in a while. And that's where the three previous LAVs hit IEDs. So we rolled in with a National Guard unit from Arkansas, and they were our route clearance. So they had basically tractors with mine rollers on them, like big tractors with like cement rollers.
Common engineer group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we rolled in with them. It took us like 18 hours. And if you've ever been on an 18-hour car trip, imagine doing it in the most bumpy terrain and vehicle ever. And we finally get to this hill, and we didn't know it at the time. No one had told us, which is kind of in retrospect, would have been a big deal. It was an old Russian fighting position. And so the Taliban knew it was a strong point. The foxholes from the Russians were actually still there. Like we found 545 brass and these foxholes. And so the Russians were there fighting in the 90s. And so we rolled in, and it was interesting because I had the IED dog on in our vehicle. And so we sent the dog out. EOD was with us riding in our vehicle, and they started searching. And in about an hour, we just realized it was a minefield. And we had set back a little bit. Fortunately, we had a plan. We set back a little bit from it, but they found I think it was in all, we detonated 9 IEDs. And we found out that most of them were daisy chained because the explosions were huge. Yeah, they were huge. And I always tell anyone who talks badly about the National Guard, those guys were fearless because they knew the IEDs were there, and they were just driving their vehicles with mine rollers all around them and trying to detonate these IEDs for us because we were on a timeline to put up this fob to disrupt what the Taliban was doing. And they had this, I don't know what the rank structure of the army is, but it looked like a gunnery sergeant kind of emblem, which I think they just called him a staff sergeant. And he was like, well, this is my boys' jobs. They're going to go do it. And they actually hit 2 IEDs in their vehicles. And one of the guys got seriously hurt and medevaced. So long story short, we ended up clearing out this area. And it became apparent to us that we needed to switch out from LAVs to like MRAPs and MATVs that would mitigate our risk for death.
Right.
And so we switched that out, and it's just a steady grind for like 3 months. And I promise I'm getting into the story. I just wanted to give the background of what was going on.
Totally fine.
Okay. So we switch out to MATVs and MRAPs. LAVs, we're not going to cut it for what we were dealing with. It was mostly an IED threat, not very much of a small arms threat. There were guys that were doing that, but it wasn't. Our biggest threat was the IEDs, the mines. So we switched out to MATVs and MRAPs, and we just start patrolling the area either on foot or in vehicles. So remember when I earlier had said that it didn't work out for me, that I wasn't going to have to go hike anymore? That's what I mean, was the IED threat was so high that we just couldn't risk using vehicles at certain points. And so one of the things that happened because of that was we were doing presence patrols, and then we were cycling, where we were running almost 1 to 2 missions a day, where we were cycling back to vehicles and going hitting these outskirt towns to try to make sure there wasn't, weaponry coming into our AO. And so one night we were out there, and we had just got done with like an 18-hour kind of cycle mission, which we went through all of the towns. We would go to a town, set up a patrol base with the vehicles. A couple of guys would stay in each vehicle, one guy on the machine gun, one guy in the seat monitoring the radio. And in case we needed QRF, we were our own QRF. There was no real support within anywhere that would mean anything to us, even air, because
no one else is coming.
Yeah, no one else is coming. And we were in certain situations where we would call for flybys where we could tell stuff was going bad. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, there's no one even within an hour of you. Medevacs were over an hour away. So we kind of knew. And looking back, I feel like we didn't take it into a serious consideration that was a thing. Because like I said, we hadn't lost anybody. We knew there was a threat. But when you go months, I think we were 5 or 6 months into the deployment without losing anyone, you kind of get
a bit of complacency. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we didn't take that.
Which is a natural, you guys don't understand. It's a natural human thing. It happens. You can only stay, you can only keep the edge of your knife sharp for so long.
Exactly. And I imagine police officers going through that. If you pull over a car every single day and eventually you get into a shooting or an OIS with that person, you probably didn't see that, you weren't as dialed in as you could have been.
No, and I would say complacency within the law enforcement community is a little bit more than what it would be in the military.
Because you're doing it every day, day in, day out. You get to go home at the end of the day. You lull yourself into a sense of security because, hey, I went home. It's fine.
Yeah.
No. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. So we set up, we got done with that cycling mission. I don't think we found anything. We found some drugs, pretty common down there. The opium's grown in the South. And so we confiscated some opium. And then we were setting up basically like a camping site, I would like to call it a patrol base, but we circled the wagons, 240s, which is a machine gun pointed outbound. Someone's on watch on every single vehicle all night. We cycle through watch. So we're getting down. And I remember talking to my buddy that it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Cause I thought we were going to be dealing after, you clear a base, of 9 daisy chained IEDs. I'm just expecting the IED threat. We're going to hit an IED. Something terrible is going to happen. Nothing did, which is very fortunate. But I was also kind of, complacent in my own way where I'm like, oh, nothing's happening, right. Which in my mindset at the time, I was 20 years old, about to be 21. I was 20 years old, and I just wanted to get back into the fight. I'd done some stuff back in 2010. I was bored. I'm over in Afghanistan, 7 months away from my family. I want to be doing my job. And while I'm talking to him, it's about dusk. And me and him see a flash at the same time. And then we hear just this really, really loud boom. And I've heard IEDs quite a bit. So I knew it was about a 500 pounder. And so a 500-pound bomb goes off. We can tell it's about 1.5 miles, 2 miles down the way. So not that far. It reverberated the vehicle. I remember the Mat V, there's dust all over it. It shook off. It got all over us. And our staff sergeant and our lieutenant get out of their vehicle. And they look at us and we're like, hey, that IED blast was really close. We try to raise anyone on the radio. And like I said, we're kind of by ourselves. And the fob's down that area. So we're thinking there's some Marines that just got hit, maybe a dismounted patrol. And so we re-throw everything into the vehicles. I get up into the turret on the 240 and the SPAT V. I'm the point vehicle. So I'm the first vehicle in the convoy. That's what my job was every time when I was in the LAVs, I was the point gunner. So I was the first gunner in the vehicle. And so that's where I wanted to be. That's where my vehicle commander wanted to be. That's where my driver wanted to be. And so we roll off this hill. And if anyone's been to Afghanistan before, you know that if there's one IED, there's more. Right. And so I got my MVGs down. I'm scanning. I'm looking. I'm locked on. And we roll up and it gets dark. It takes us a while to get down this road because we're trying to mitigate the IED threat. Because even though we had a mine roller, the Taliban was really good at offsetting IEDs, which means they'd put the pressure plate in front. So you'd run over the pressure plate with the mine roller and the IED would blow up underneath you. And so we were trying to mitigate that threat. And I'm looking with my night vision goggles. We can tell we're getting close to whatever had blown up because there's still some fire on the ground. Mm-hmm. And so I lift up my MVGs. We have white light and there's an ear on the mine roller tire, just an ear. And I'm like, I yell, stop, we stop. And we turn on our high beams because there was no loom that night. So MVGs work off of the moon for the most part. Like you can get some illumination without the moon, but so we use our high beams, which in retrospect was probably not a good idea running into a possible ambush. So we use our high beams and there's just body parts everywhere. And quickly I realized that it was ABP, which is the Afghan Border Police. And they ride around in like Ford Rangers, basically. No armor. They run with like 6 guys in the back, 2 guys in the front. And that's what they do. And there's just about 8 to 9 guys worth of body parts everywhere. And there's an ABP truck that's about 20 meters away. And they're not moving. They're terrified in the back. And so I get the interpreter. He steps out on like the Mat Vs have like a side thing that guys have in their trucks where you can step on it without stepping on the ground. And he's shouting at them not to move, stay where they're at. And as soon as they see us, I guess they just put it together that everything was okay. And they just get out of the truck and they start collecting these body parts. And they're walking all around the ground, all around us, picking up all these body parts. And the thing that always stuck with me, and the reason that I tell this story is I don't think I had the correct mindset rolling into it. I knew there was an IED blast. I'd seen blown up bodies before. I'd seen all of this before, but I'd become so distant from that mindset I used to have that there's this guy, and it was an ABP guy, gray hair, older dude. And he picks up this torso, but he picks it up by the hand. So like the torso was split in half and he picks this torso up by the hand, and rigor mortis had already set in a little bit. And so he's walking away from me and the torso's upside down and he's like holding the hand of the torso. And so this torso is just kind of floating in space a little bit.
Right. It's a little surreal.
A little surreal. And I'm trying to like tell my new guys in the back who've never seen that before, because they're getting ready to go out with minesweepers and getting to go out with the dog. And if you ever worked with dogs before, they usually get kind of spooked by bodies, or they can. Some dogs do. We had a Labrador retriever. And I was like, hey, man, I think you should kind of take a second before you let the dog out. And he let the dog out, and the dog went right up to a body part and just skirted right between my legs and just sat there. His name was Raven. And he was so he's just shaking. So the IED dog's out of the game. But what we figured out from that night was they were smuggling up IEDs across the Helmand River down by this certain town. And we knew what town it was. It was the last time we had gone there, they actually spoken Russian to us, to an interpreter. And so Americans were not like 100% on their radar. Like an older gentleman came out and he started to speak Russian. And the interpreter had to tell me he didn't know how to speak Russian. So we knew that that's where the IEDs and everything was coming from. And so that night we slept in the minefield. We couldn't move. We had to wait for EOD, but EOD was about 6 hours away. So we took shaving cream and marked all the metal signatures we hit. And it turned out we were sleeping around I think it ended up being 5 IEDs around where we were sleeping.
Damn.
And so we slept there that night. And this just kind of turned into going from being a completely complacent deployment into being a very the end of it was very kind of fast. And do I have time to tell a little bit more? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. So after that, we had come up with and I was a corporal, so I was an E-Force. I didn't really get to go into the mission planning very much. But we kind of knew we wanted a retribution, even though those weren't our guys. Seeing guys that you had worked with, because we had worked with that border police kind of, I don't know what they called themselves, outfit, platoon. We knew a lot. We knew some of those guys that had been blown up, and so we kind of wanted to bring the fight to the enemy, because at that point we were just dealing with mines.
Right. They were your friends. They were your homies to a certain extent, and they were on your side, and that was intended for them and you.
Yeah, exactly. And just kind of seeing them go through that, I kind of imagine my guys. So we decided that we were going to patrol to this town, which we did a couple times after this story. But it was about, if I remember right, it was about 15 kilometers. And so that's 15,000 meters. I don't know what that is in miles, but it's pretty far. And we decided not to take vehicles just because of the IED threat. So we were going to take a very, very weird path to get there to avoid IEDs. And we had to carry our food, our water, our ammunition. And we were going to set up on this river and try to we're going to interdict vehicles and try to find weapon systems. And so we went down there and we patrolled down there. It was a long patrol. We set up a patrol base. We went down to the river. And some of us stayed back and we interdicted vehicles. So I was with my buddy Jeff, and it was just the two of us, and we were interdicting vehicles on this road. And the other platoon or the other squad called up to us and they said, we have a metal signature. We're digging it up. It's really, really big. We kind of need you guys down here. And the villagers are starting to clear out of the area across the river from us. So it was right on this beach on the Helmand River. And usually for us, anytime villagers start to clear out, especially kids, something bad's about to happen.
Yeah. Not a good thing.
Yeah. So they
like rats on a sinking ship.
Yeah, exactly. And Taliban, they really don't care about killing kids when they have to. They use them to, I'm sure they still do, but they used to use kids to, you send a kid into the middle of the platoon with a wheelbarrow and they would command death the kid and kill the kid and kill the Marines. And so that happened in Sangin. And so they didn't really care about the kids, but if they could to win the hearts and minds, they would tell the villagers to go inside their houses. And so we got that radio traffic and we started sprinting down to this beach. It was about a 1.5 mile movement, and we all set up there. And I remember just being soaked in sweat. It was spring, so it's 107 degrees. You have full gear on. Our combat loadout at the time was 7 magazines. So we had 7 magazines of 5.56, all our other gear. We're set up on this riverbank. And it was kind of the most surreal firefight that I can think of, because we found a mortar tube. It was an 81 millimeter. And one of the guys who dug it out is holding it above his head, oh, look at what we found. Yes, they were going to use it against our fob. And our squad leader is looking down into this hole, and you just hear this loud crack, not like an AK. We're pretty sure it was an SVD or a Mosin Nagant.
Sure. And
it cracks next to him. And my squad leader had been I think he'd been in Ramadi or Fallujah. I can't remember anymore. But, seasoned guy, seen combat the last Afghan deployment. And he just throws a fit. When he got shot at, he didn't take cover. He didn't do anything. He threw a fit. Have you ever seen a toddler get pissed off and start yelling?
Their feet and yelling?
Yeah, exactly. That's what he did. And he's just started letting out rounds across the river towards the direction of the shot. And it was just, no one could maneuver. you couldn't do anything because they're across the river. You're on the other side of the river. So it just became a shooting match of who could see who and who could hit who. And everyone's just shouting. Everything's going crazy. Rounds are kicking up in the dirt. And I just still remember, like, I shot like a few rounds and I look over at my squad leader and he's still like standing straight up, like still just pissed off. And they start marking targets with 203s, which is a grenade launcher, using smoke and launching. And this is part of the story that I didn't think about bringing up because I don't want to bring any, like, I don't want to say hate, but any critique to the Marine Corps. But we were issued the HK IAR, which is basically a HK 416 extended right before we went. So it replaced our saws. And so we didn't have a squad automatic weapon with like a 200 round drum or anything. We had these IARs that use 30 round magazines, which would have been fine. That's our only full auto gun. And in those kind of fights where they're shooting with full auto AKs and everything else, and you're trying to get fire superiority, but the magazines they issued us didn't drop free. And so they were hitting the magazine release and they would have to strip the magazines out every single time they went to reload. So it became from a 1-step process to 2. And we're trying to get fire superiority and we just couldn't do it. So we had to rely on just the fact that we had ACOGs, which I still love ACOGs to this day. And good communication and getting our hits. And that fight was just kind of surreal because, going from a whole deployment of not really seeing anything, there wasn't really anything going on, to being in this fight on this beach where you can't maneuver. I'd never seen anything like that or really heard. Like I'd never fought in urban combat, but where guys get locked down in a house, that's kind of what it felt like.
Right. And
so that fight ends. We can't even do a battle damage assessment. We get air on station. There was actually a AC-130 that was supporting a special forces unit down south of us. And they came on station and kind of the bad guys ran off. But that fight turned into just a nightmare on the way back. So we had to carry the mortar tube back, the base plate, and we got hit in a sandstorm. So we actually ran out of food and water. And we were stuck in this one spot for like 2 days. It was like the easy deployment became hard, where we ran out of food and water. We were actually buying food from the local Afghans that were near us.
Right. You had 6 months of cakewalk and then it all goes to shit at the
end. And so that's why I thought of telling the story today, because it kind of showed our complacency, where we didn't really expect, even though we should have, to get into something. And we got into something bad and it just kept cascading, where we ran out of water, we ran out of food, and we had to make the call to walk back in a sandstorm, which they call red air. Pilots can't fly in it. So if you hit an IED, you get ambushed again, someone gets hurt. You're kind of fucked. You have to rely on your corpsman and you have to try to carry them out. Yeah. And it was one of those, I was thinking back about the 14 months I spent over there. And this was the story that always pointed out to me, because I felt like it was a failure on my part. Not a lot, like I didn't hold full responsibility. I wasn't, the end all be all when it came to things, but I could have made decisions that were better for my Marines. And I didn't, because I got complacent. And we had to walk up this hill to get to the fob. And I just remember looking back, and it was like one of those moments where you feel like shame, where you didn't like do something enough, where all of us are like seizing up because we hadn't drank water in like probably a day and a half. We all had like a sip of water and we're just seizing on the way up this hill. And I'm like, a JV squad of like soccer players could kill us right now. Like we're just so fucked up. But yeah, that was the reason I wanted to share that story. I had another one, but I really wanted to focus on this one because hopefully it helps someone that's in a leadership position. Like if you allow yourself to complacent, the people underneath you will too.
Right.
And,
yeah. It goes. I just had this discussion with somebody yesterday where they were in a leadership position at a company, and they were asking me about something they wanted their employees to be doing. And he said, do you have like some sort of secret or some sort of advice on how I can get them to do this? I said, well, how much of it are you doing? And he goes, what do you mean? I said, are you making it a priority? I said, I named 3 other programs that he had implemented in his business. I said, you did this, and you did this. I said, you made those a priority, and you told your employees, these are a priority to me, therefore they're a priority to you. I said, you got to start making the things that you want them to do a priority for you. Don't make it an afterthought. Don't make it hey, I'd like you to do this, and then, not really care. And it's just, that was his complacency. If you're in a leadership role, whether it's at a business or in the military or on a police department, be patent, lead from the front, be the guy that you're not complacent, and therefore you expect your boys and your girls that follow you to not be complacent as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember, I'll add on to that real quick. I took a brand new commander to our department, had just gotten hired on, came over as a commander. None of us knew him from Adam. His first impression to me was he got introduced to us all at his whatever hiring. And then I was working a graveyard shift, and he wanted to come for a ride along with some different shifts. He came for a ride along with me, and we pulled over a car, and he was acting as the cover and I was acting as the contact. And when I pulled this dude out, I'm like, all right, let me pull the other dude out. And I'm like, hey, can you get his horsepower? And he's like, I don't have a pen or a notepad. And he's in full uniform. He's wearing the belt. He wants to go for a ride along. He wants to be my cover officer. And yet here he is complacent because he's a commander. What am I going to need a pen for? And that was my first impression of him. And that stuck with me forever, that this guy he wanted to be out there looking like he was doing the work, but not doing the work.
Yeah. And there's a thing that I think about a lot. So I'm 31 now. So that deployment was 11 years ago. And there's a thing that we said as NCOs that I still feel ashamed to this day. So anyone who thinks that that the shit you do when you're younger doesn't matter, is we said, oh, we think the Taliban is gone. Obviously the Taliban was not fucking gone. But what we did was what we installed in the younger guys, because we were pissed off because we weren't in the fight and that we were bored and we were honestly being ignorant, was we installed in the younger guys, oh yeah, I don't have to worry about this. And so that's something I think about all the time as a leadership thing. If I could go back in time, or if I ever had to do it again and I was in a leadership position where I had to take people into combat or I had to install mindset, is I take it overly serious now. And I'm sure there's some people on my staff that work with me as a teacher where they're like, this guy is over the top with some of the stuff that he has us talking about and training about. But there's a reason behind it. Because I still feel ashamed to this day. Thankfully, none of my guys died. We won that fight. Thankfully, no one died later in that deployment. I think after that, we locked it on. So that's one redeeming thing I take from it. But there's a great sense of shame that I have. And I can't imagine the survivor's guilt I would have if one of my guys would have died because I didn't take it serious enough.
Oh,
For sure.
So,
well,
go ahead.
At my agency, we have the 10 Commandments of Policing, where it's things to follow and live by so you don't die. It's tombstone courage, complacency, and there's a bunch of other stuff. And it's on the roll call room door. And yet still guys get complacent. You get newer officers who come, they're like, oh, this is a slower area. I'm like, bro, you have, and I had that same thought when I went there from a faster area, and I was like, oh, this is cake. And then shit started popping off, and I'm like, what is going on? And I'm like, dude, I had to tell these young kids, I'm like, you got to be careful, because just because you think you're in a slower area doesn't mean it's slow, doesn't mean there's no danger. And to the point where people were so lax, out on patrol and things like that, especially with their partner officers, weren't really talking about contact cover. They weren't talking about what would happen if I went down or you went down, who's going to treat, what are you going to do? Because a lot of them only have the base, first aid level. And my buddy impaled himself on a fucking wrought iron fence. And if it wasn't for me and my quick thinking, he probably would have lost a lot of fucking blood and would have been, nerve damage in his leg. But because I was able to, control the situation and had more training and experience than most of those other guys, even though we had a former SWAT operator, but he couldn't see what I could see. And I was able to talk to him. We were able to work the problem and ultimately get him to safety. But no one had really seen shit like that. No one really carried stuff. And then the department started supplying more IFACs, and they just, more patrol equipment for first aid, for easier to get to trauma stuff that you could actually wear on your person. And then tourniquets. We started getting tourniquets, and then people started hanging them out. But no one had really thought about that until we had situations that had happened like this, and officers actually knew what the fuck they were doing and were able to treat it. But if that would happen to someone else, like they were complacent, they were like, "Oh, this will never happen." They didn't even think about it; wasn't in their wheelhouse, and dudes would get hurt or injured. And then I can't tell you how many officers I've seen so complacent when they roll up to a hot call, or they roll up to, oh, this is just a regular domestic, and they park right in front of the house. And you're like, what the fuck are you doing? Back off, flip around the block, bypass that shit, park down the street, walk up, because there were so many times where dudes would park in front and they would get ambushed, or shit would, the suspect would run up to their car and they wouldn't have a chance to get out. And next thing you know, they're trying to throw that bitch in reverse, and they're trying to, create distance so that they can, minimize the threat, so they can dismount their vehicle and handle the issue. So there was like all these things that I see happen, and I'm like, dude, what the fuck? And it's up to us as senior officers to be able to take these new guys under our wings. And I would do it right off the bat, right when they would get there. I would try to shock the shit out of them and explain all the things that can go wrong and that will go wrong, and that to not take this shit for granted, and in the long and short of it. But it was just wild how many new cops are so complacent, and it's so dangerous. And hopefully there's some out there that are listening that are new, or maybe some older guys that are like, you know what, that's right, we really haven't had a talk like this. Maybe I should talk to my guys and just make sure their head's in the right place, because it's not like a deployment. You get to go home every night. You have other things you're worried about: your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your fucking kids. And when you go to work, you have to turn that shit off and be there, because if you're not, that complacency will get you, and it could kill you.
Yeah, it's a 12-hour deployment every time you go to work. So I will add to that, with that kind of behavior, whether it's Marine Corps, Army, police, fire, I will say this. We had this discussion in a class I was in just this week, and it was talking about, somebody doing something that wasn't safe, right? Was not really the best way of doing it, the safest way of doing it. And the instructor says, how many times can you get away with it? 1,000, 2,000. And I said to him, you can get away with it until you can't. I said, you can do it 1,000 times, but that 1,001, you can do it 2,000 times, but that 2,001, it's that one time, and you never know when that one time is going to be. And that's why complacency is such a bitch. It's gonna bite you in the ass when you least expect it. Why? Because you're being complacent, and thereby you least expect it.
Yeah, and how bad shit had gotten with complacency. There was dudes who didn't even know what an arterial bleed looked like, guys and gals alike, whether they're brand new or they have some time on the job. They didn't know what an arterial bleed was, and it was up to the guys who knew what the fuck we were doing. And most of us were all prior military. We're like, you don't know what an arterial bleed is, so we're having to give hip pocket classes in roll call. And like, hey, this is how you apply a tourniquet. This is the proper way. That you don't put it right over the wound. This is what an arterial bleed looks like.
Yeah,
this is
that's
when
also
you use
a failure
dressing.
of leadership.
And it was fucking wild. I'm like, how are we first responders in one of the best agencies? How are we first responders, yet we don't know what an arterial bleed looks like? We don't know when to apply a tourniquet, how to apply a tourniquet, when to apply a pressure dressing, or when to apply a chest seal. Like, this shit isn't really talked about. I'm like, this should be a priority, even when they do updates. It's just, oh, this is the first aid, CPR on children and adults, and they really don't get into the nitty gritty shit. And I'm like, what the fuck? This is
I went to a stop
dude.
the bleed class. I went to a stop the bleed class recently, right? It was at a hospital. You know how long it took? It was an hour and a half class, scheduled for an hour and a half. It took 45 minutes. Took 45 minutes. Took 45 minutes to go in and learn how to pack a wound, to learn how to use pressure dressing, learn how to make pressure dressing when one's not available, learn how to apply a tourniquet, and learn how to do a life-threatening bleed assessment. That was it. 4 things.
Yeah, I had to make
45 minutes.
I had to make a pressure dressing on the fly when my buddy impaled his fucking leg.
Yeah.
Lady came. I was like, I had to call a lady at some lady's fucking house. And I look at her and her face is white. I mean, she was a white lady, but she went like Casper. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I was like, bring me all the towels that you have. I soaked every one of her fucking towels till I could get the bleeding to stop. And my buddy had passed out on the ground from pain. And I was like, dude, this is wild. And I had to make a makeshift pressure dressing and do it all while communicating over the radio, because dudes are just freezing up and seizing. And I'm like, this is fucking wild, dude. Like, the amount of complacency that I have seen, it drops my fucking jaw, to be quite honest. And if that's a new trend that's going around, whether it be in the military or police community, like that's dangerous as shit.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't think it's a new trend. I think it's just cyclical. We go through our cycles of vigilance, and then we go through our down, like we just let shit get away from us. And whether it's on a personal level or on a departmental or a service, branch of service level, like it just happens. It's part of that. I'll say it. Part of it is a failure of leadership, because if you're 100%. not keeping your people trained, if you're not keeping your people sharp, if you're not demanding the best from them, and if you allow yourself to be complacent, they'll allow themselves to be complacent.
Oh yeah, a lot of agencies don't make training a priority anymore.
No.
They're just like, we just need to man the bodies and handle the calls and get it out there. You're like, okay, what about training?
Pay a couple of thousand now for training, or pay a couple million in lawsuits or death benefits later. So, well, Ryan, we appreciate you coming on the show, and I think it's really cool. I would be interested to find out just how many Marines went on to be elementary school teachers. I would guess the number is smaller than, say, Marines that went on to be cops. But
probably, yeah.
But I think that's really cool, man. And I also think that the fact that you're there trying to help change the hearts and minds of teachers and administration in the school system and school board members, and having these tough conversations with people that really have, in a lot of ways lived in an academic bubble is super important.
Well, I appreciate it. That's my goal now is, I want to be the best teacher I can be and impact my students. But, if I can help mitigate, at least for my school, any kind of risk, that's what my goal is.
One school at a time.
Bodies for continuous improvement.
Yep.
Good to go.
Well, we always give our guests a chance to dedicate their episode to whomever they would like. And Chuck tells me you have someone in mind.
Yeah. So my best friend's name was Nicholas Rodriguez. We did our first deployment together. Spent every moment together on the deployment beforehand. And unfortunately, when we got back, I didn't understand what he was going through, because we didn't really talk about mental illness back then. You lied on the report so you could deploy again if you were going through issues. Yep. And unfortunately, he was one of those guys that never talked about what was bothering him. And I want to dedicate my this podcast, or me speaking to him, because there's not a moment I don't think about him or what I could have done differently to look for the signs that he was suicidal, and he ended up taking his life in the room next to me after we had talked, 10 minutes before. I heard the gunshot, woke up to it. And like I said, there's not a moment I don't think about him. So, this podcast for him. And if that helps anyone by hearing that, like, check on your buddies. It's okay to ask your friend, even if you're hard chargers, and check with them. Just see if they're
ask
okay.
the fucking question. Ask the question. Ask, are you thinking about killing yourself?
Yep.
A lot of people
100%.
are afraid to ask that question. And you know what? Maybe just asking the question is going to give them like, oh shit, he like legit understands. She like legit understands that I might be going through a rough time. And they, if they're not, their reaction will probably tell you what the fuck? No, no. And they, okay, bro, it's just, but if they even qualify, if they hesitate, if they hem and haw, if they, hey, maybe dig a little deeper, bro. Just get that question out there. Don't be complacent, I guess, again.
Yeah, 100%. So I appreciate you guys having me on. Let me tell my story. Hopefully it helps somebody.
We'd love to have you back. You said you had another story, so keep in touch. We'll have you back on.
All right, man. Sounds good.
We'll get an update on what you're doing at the school.
Yeah, hopefully it'll include tourniquets and chest seals. So I'll keep you guys posted.
Well, we'll stay in touch. If you need any, I can reach out and find out with some of the school districts around here how they made that happen, and maybe we can share information.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay in touch. And to your friend Nick, your brother in combat and arms, rest easy, brother. We got it from here. Chuck, why don't you finish this out tonight?
Well, thank you all for listening today. If you like today's podcast, please go follow us on our Instagram at @war_. If you like today's podcast, please go follow us
I'm not gonna.
on our Instagram at @war_stories_official, and our Facebook at War Stories Podcast. If you already follow us, share our post and our info. You can also go to the link in our bio on Instagram and Facebook to reach all of our socials, our media, and our website. Our podcast is on all major podcast streaming platforms, as well as on YouTube. If you want to support us, please go to our website at www.warstoriesofficial.com. Grab some gear. We have the Woody hoodies, shirts, patches, and stickers left, and it's coming to get cold again. Hopefully, break this heat wave of 110 fucking degrees where I'm at. And we do have hats that are coming.
It got up to the 90s by me today.
Yeah, it was like 110 today. Fucking crazy. And then we have the tank tops that we're in works with, supply chain issues.
Yes.
So we're going to get those done. Just be patient with us. And if it somehow gets too cold and we're like, oh man, tank tops aren't good, same design, we'll just throw it on a shirt. Yep. But yeah, so if you have a story you want to be featured on our show, thank you. And you think you have a story you want to be featured on our show, please go to booking.warstories@gmail.com. Again, that's booking.warstories@gmail.com, and send me your story and I can get you booked. We are looking for law enforcement, corrections officers, dispatchers, firefighters, medics, and veterans. If you have a friend who you think would be a great fit, let them know about us and give them our booking email. And please make an introduction.
And that's how we found Ryan here. That's exactly how we found Ryan here. So we appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks for coming on, man.
All right, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
All right, and until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.